just a couple of months ago, maybe a month
Yeah.
ago. Yeah. So we started discussing AI strategies, and we were thinking about how to fit those topics into this conversation. And like many times in my life, it's going to appear as though I'm very clever, but this is purely coincidental. But the topics we ended up discussing are going to align pretty closely with a lot of our presenters that have already spoken. So we inadvertently planned on talking about human-centered design, and that came up already, so that worked out. We were going to talk about democratizing data access, and that came up. And we were really talking about adoption and trust, and that's come up. So like I said, just stumbling into looking clever seems to be my flavor. But the goal here is to really just get a conversation going, almost watching us have this almost podcast on stage type conversation. And I really want y'all to be thinking about questions either that we can, if we have time, y'all can ask to us at the end, or please feel free to engage us afterwards, and we'd love to talk more. This is all in an effort to spin up this AI SIG that is new this year and get more involvement. So without further ado, I would just want to, with those topics in mind about adoption, human-centered AI, this democratization of data, I wanted to start off and say, Ankit, how are you tackling these top topics at UNOS?
Yeah. First of all, it is amazing to be here. So thank you all so much for having me. I know that it has been an absolutely engaging and an incredible past couple of days, and I'm jealous I was not here yesterday, but I'm happy to be here today. So for those of you who don't know what UNOS is or what UNOS does, UNOS stands for the United Network for Organ Sharing. They run the nation's organ transplant allocation system. So any organ transplant that happens in this country, for the most part, goes through UNOS's system. UNOS engages policymakers, including medical professionals like the ones here in this room, and also experts around the country to form policy. That policy then gets implemented into the organ allocation system. We collect millions upon millions of data points, and then we are able to calculate in real time a matching algorithm that matches the organ that's coming available from the donor to the to individuals that are on the waiting list. There's about 100,000 folks that are on the waiting list today across all organs. The biggest, of course, is kidney transplants. It's absolutely a massive opportunity for us to continue efficiency as a country on the policies that we want to see in healthcare and implement those policies in our organ allocation system more broadly. You know, I think when we think about data and the allocation system that we have today, it's extremely complex, right? We are looking at the organ that we have to match, and that's coming available, and or multiple organs coming out of one particular donor. And we not only have to understand all of the different like medical data points that you would, and clinical data points that you would need to capture, but then you also have to think about the overall logistics of where is this organ going? When is this organ viable and when is it no longer viable? How do you get it out of the donor's body and into the recipient's body as quickly as possible? All of that takes a lot of computing power. It takes a lot of information gathering all at once in order to make a decision in less than 30 seconds, right? And then send that decision out to multiple transplant surgeons all around the country to make sure that they also can accept the organ, right? So we I think, at UNOS, but I think more broadly in healthcare in general, and probably as a society as a whole, we're probably just at the cusp of really understanding what artificial intelligence can do, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is both really, really exciting, as I think evidence in the keynote from yesterday, as well as other conversations and talks, but it's also super terrifying because we can certainly go and envision like what the future is going to be, but I think we're stuck right now as like a group of human beings that can do nothing but only envision what the future is going to look like with AI, but nobody really knows what when we're going to get there,
I think that's such a common theme, and the one of the things that, as I was talking to you when we first started this conversation, was that it feels like UNOS maybe has a leg up on some of the providers in this space, in that what we're really struggling with, and hopefully I'm not airing too much dirty laundry, but there's this sort of inertia that comes from that. I mean, terror seems like a strong word, but it is maybe terrifying, the things that we all worry about. But when I was talking to you, I got the impression that by and large, UNOS has a pretty firm grasp on policies, process, procedure. And that's something that I think, from the data standpoint, that we're often described as drinking from the fire hose, just feeling like we're under an avalanche, and there's just constantly shifting strategies and priorities. Did you all feel that way, or have you felt that way at UNOS? And if so, how did you get out from underneath or out from behind the fire hose? Or are you right there with us?
Yeah,
we're just better at hiding it.
No, we are right there with you guys. I think there is, the world of organ transplant is changing in this country in particular, but also across the globe. There are varying different types of organ transplant allocation systems outside of the United States. Most of them are not democratic. Most of them are not equitable. And so the United States really has a leg up in building probably the world's most powerful organ allocation system. But UNOS has challenges, just like a health system has challenges in adopting these new technologies. And I think we're all really trying to understand where we go with this, right? Like, is it going to be this extremely large curve up to transformation, or is it going to be a slog in trying to understand what we're going to allow as a group of technologists or people that are responsible for protecting a health system's data and or healthcare data, and how much of this democratization of artificial intelligence that we have today, how much can we actually protect before it goes out into the ether, and then what do we do?
Yeah. Well, and I know we have a fairly limited time, and we could probably talk up for the rest of today, and y'all would be putting us to bed at some point. But I want to keep going with different topics on we'll keep touching on governance. But you mentioned just there the tying in with the human decisions, and how do you mentioned human-centered design, and that came up yesterday, and it's something that I recently have been talking to our human factors teams at Carillion, and it seems to be popping up more and more. So, and you mentioned that as something that you do quite a lot. Do you think that ties into sort of helping determine where we go with it, or is it sort of that's how we do it, not where we go? Or is that
I think that when human-centered design is starting to become a buzzword just for buzzword's sakes, right? But before I joined UNOS, I was at the White House. Before I was at the White House, I started an organization called Round Trip, which is a healthcare transportation marketplace, right? One of the biggest barriers in social determinants of health is transportation. We built a marketplace in order to help get people to their medical appointments, get people out of the hospital. When we were designing the system, and when we were actually starting our company, we did so with the care managers, the care coordinators, the social workers that were actually coordinating transportation for patients. We did not go into a back room and say, you know what, here's what the software's got to do, right? Here's what the app's got to do. At the White House, you wouldn't think about it. There's an organization called the U.S. Digital Service. If you don't know, they are probably some of the leading technologists in the country that come into our government and do a stint in the government. They can stay for 6 months, up to 4 years, and the biggest charge is take your expertise and make the biggest impact. But one of the key things that you do, whether you're working at a startup, whether you're working in the government, or whether you're working at a nonprofit, or probably in even a health system, is to make sure that you're designing systems with users, not for them. And that's really human-centered design. And I think, we have an opportunity as technologists in healthcare to really push the narrative of let's just design the system for them because we know what's better than they do. And I think how you inject things like artificial intelligence into understanding and building, understanding empathy and building trust is really the core aspects of any system that you're going to build, right?
Yeah, I think one of the themes that I've noticed here, I mean, not just in this or even the last two HIMSS events I've been at, but maybe a pervasive theme throughout all of these conferences and in healthcare AI, IT in general, is that we keep talking almost exclusively about clinical AI. It's very heavily preferenced, and as I was looking at the questions that you and I had come up with, a theme emerged of both of us were thinking, and maybe a lot of us were thinking, but we won't say it out loud, about non-clinical applications.
Oh.
And I tried to do some back-of-the-napkin math. I could not find good research, but I estimated that for every one clinical interaction, there's got to be in excess of 5, 10, 15 non-clinical interactions. And if you add up the average number of clinical interactions a system has, you're looking at a heavy sway towards the non-clinical interactions. And every one of those interactions has the opportunity for AI innovation, just like a clinical one does. Now, our non-clinical expense doesn't make up the same percentage, but it's not insignificant. And so I want to go a little bit there. Now, do you see...
Well, before that, tell me non-clinical interaction. Like when
so
you
I'm talking,
talk,
this is where someone in HR is talking to someone in EVS. Neither of those people touch or interact with a patient directly. Maybe this one in EVS, but you could have someone in payroll talking to someone in HR, right? These people are not there to provide direct patient care. They support the teams that do. There are tons of optimization opportunities in those interactions that could benefit, and that's healthcare operations as a whole, not just clinical operations. And I think one of the things that we get really zoomed in, and the previous presentation is a great example of where we have a lot of opportunity to do great things with clinical improvement. But for every one of those presentations, there's an equally powerful non-clinical example. And I think UNOS is a good example of how you're doing the logistics.
Yeah. Well, part of it.
Yeah, part of it. You're part of the
that's
logistics.
right. Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the clinical interaction. You just happen to be dealing with clinically valuable goods.
Yeah.
So I think, what are some of the ways that you see non-clinical impacts showing up, manifesting?
I mean, look, I think whether you work for a nonprofit or whether you work for a large health system, I think we're always going to have hurdles when it comes to the data that we collect and the data that we think is going to happen, right? And so when we start putting together a whole bunch of data and we start building out our AI model, I mean, the future of organ allocation, I fundamentally believe is not going to be in writing hundreds of lines of code, right? But in the future, it is going to be in interpreting policy and looking at billions upon billions of data points to make a decision on a patient's future, right? And I think that's going to have to come from the words and the policy documentation. It's going to have to come from the actual clinical data points that we're capturing, and it's going to have to come from the logistics of charter flights and the private flights that we that we have today, right? Like all of that stuff has to come together in order for us to make a calculated decision in that very moment about what the future is going to be and where that organ goes, right? I can't imagine though at a health system what some of the hurdles are that you're facing around like ensuring that artificial intelligence kind of like integrates pretty easily into like that healthcare operations.
Well,
how do you do that?
Yeah, you probably can. Maybe it's just you don't want to imagine. I think we have I mentioned the priorities and the processes. Can you still hear me if I lean back? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I talk loud. So the policy stuff I mentioned, that's definitely a hurdle, and that's mainly just because there's so many different angles we have to come at it and consider. Dr. Morgan yesterday, my boss, was on stage, and the other CMIOs were discussing the safety and the measured pace we have to move, and I think that's part of it. That the clinical space is arguably one of the riskiest spaces to make an effort into, and that is where our focus is. But it's a lot less risky to figure out a better way to turn over a dirty room, right? Like there's not a lot of clinical PHI risk in doing that. from an AI standpoint. And I think those sorts of things are obviously hurdles, the policy, but there's also architectural things. And I don't exactly know why, but the healthcare IT has always just seemed to, and I was in it, so I can say this, I feel like, but we've just never been able to keep up with the same pace of utilizing containers, for example, or microservices, or deploying Kubernetes, right? I love and I deeply enjoy those technologies when I'm developing something, but when it comes time to take that stack of utilities and deliver it into a product mentality through CI/CD and DevOps, there's friction, because that's not how Epic deploys. That's not how Cerner deploys.
Right.
And so to shift those mindsets from that that waterfall deployment, or that quarterly release cycle, or we're doing 2 upgrades this year, into I need to make 12 updates today, right? AWS was just up here, and they released each one of their components on their main home screen is their own products team. And each one of them gets updated up to like 22,000 times a day. Yeah. So that's 22,000 releases a day. We're not
not even close.
We're not at a release a day. So I mean, like the gap from here to there, from an architecture standpoint, is huge. The gap from here to there, from a deployment cycle and DevOps mindset, is significant. And that's where the other concepts we spoke about are education, culture. Jeff Fuller was up here yesterday and gave a presentation on sort of instilling the concepts of analytic culture across the organization, and doing that from both directions, from the bottom up and from the top down, is difficult. And some of this stuff is genuinely hard. You don't need to become a master statistician. I assure you it's boring in some ways. And you don't need to become a programmer of 12 to 20 different programming languages. Yeah. That can be fun, but I assure you'll lose sleep, as I mentioned yesterday, right? Like, that's not a good task all the time. Yeah. Those are the complexities and hurdles, I feel, is that we need to move into that DevOps mindset, because AI just moves too fast to be waterfall, and we have to change the way that healthcare thinks about what an MVP is and how we can deliver it.
Yeah, and I think the definition of what an MVP is, a minimum viable product in healthcare, is not it's not a technological challenge, I believe. I think it's a human challenge. I think you mentioned culture, and changing culture in our health system, IT departments, and even those organizations that are really large that now have to shift and kind of meet healthcare IT where it is a huge culture change, because it's all embedded in fear, right? Well, this is just how we've always done it, and I would much rather have the somewhat stability of of an Epic or a Cerner than have 100,000 deployments a day, right? And I think that scares the crap out of me, right? To have to push that much into production. Yeah. But I think there are organizations on the complete opposite sides of the spectrum that actually show you what the art of the possible is when you can get there. Mm-hmm. But I think healthcare IT is stuck so far back. And so we talk about a lot of these, the previous conversations around value-based care and a lot of these models. I think those studies are so important, but scaling that is going to take forever, because not every health system operates in the same way, right? Mm-hmm. Every single one of our organizations has different challenges, and at a hospital setting, the pressure is immense, because I can't imagine for how many hospital CIOs or VPs of technology do we have in the room? Yeah, a couple of you guys. And I can't imagine the weight of data that is on your shoulders, and the weight of securing your entire enterprise, and how much of that is on your shoulders. I think for all of us in the room that support CIOs and CTOs, I think we all have that responsibility to make sure that we're doing so. But if all we do all day is try to protect the organization, we're never going to actually get out of that like
Yeah, I was
that hamster wheel.
I was going to take us a different direction, but you just brought up a really good point, which is that if we, this is almost going to sound like a challenge, right? Not to you, but to maybe our organizational leaders. If we don't have those sort of points on the horizon to aim towards, then we're in protection mode. We're going to keep things running stable.
Yep.
And that's why I think a lot of us have veered towards, well, we got to get governance. We've got to stabilize our environments. How are we going to do this safely? How are we going to launch these tools in a way that protect our users, that protect our data? And those are all excellent points. And it's sort of, when I don't have a project at home, I start thinking about doing maintenance. But as soon as I have a project, it's not that I forget about maintenance. Maybe a little, I forget about maintenance, but like I also am super focused on the project and I want to install the new thing. And what I think we lack at the highest levels, our CEOs and our boards, is they're not entirely sure what to do with this technology yet. And I think that's okay to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Like I understand their confusion. Like I do this professionally and it's baffling to me sometimes what's possible and what we should be focusing on. But that's also what they're there to figure out, right? They need to say, this is the direction we're going to pick. This is the target we're going to aim for. And suddenly, when you are aiming for something, you know, I casually sail. I mentioned I'm a bad sailor. I get seasick every time. But once you know where you're aiming, and even if you're feeling queasy, right, you buckle down. You're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm aiming there, and I'm going to figure out how to deal with all the other stuff. And it becomes secondary. Your primary focus is getting there. Yeah. And I think that's what we lack, is some of those objectives from the top that, and I put this up there, that there's an objective-driven AI sort of balances that human component of like, we need to make sure that our human-centered things are protected, that our data is protected, and we have the policy, but we also need to aim for something.
Yeah. I think you touched on something that I think does get lost in the healthcare setting, which is experimentation, right? Like how do you have some of these small experiments? And so I wanted to ask, maybe at Carillion, how are you fostering a culture, or how are you bringing forth that culture of experimentation while still knowing that there is a world of risk around you and you have to manage that as well?
Yeah. I mean, I try and be as irritating as ever to just promote that, but we have interns. We partner with local education partnerships to bring in that sort of, this is an opportunity that's relatively low risk. Mm-hmm. We have these students, we have these people these students are often better programmers than a lot of our other teams, right? They grew up in this stuff, and so they know C# inexplicably. They know Python for some weird reason. They're in high school, and why do you know Python? Like, I don't know. Yeah. And so they just know it. And so we do these things with them, and it's a good opportunity. But we also we try to build safe spaces. There's some folks in the audience, both from AWS, Oracle, and we're trying to make environments where we can experiment and do those things in a safe way that is demonstrative of what's possible.
Yeah.
That's often not the issue, is getting that demonstration in front of somebody and they say, oh, that is really cool. That seems like it could do a lot of good. The next question is, how do you deploy that?
Right.
Deploying one of these things at scale is a lot different, right?
Yeah.
I often joke that what I need for a data science team and an AI team is a lot like what I need to have a backyard wood shop. And like I might need a couple saws, I might need a few things here and there, and I'm going to build about 700 different versions of one table. That's way, and like 698 of them are going to be awful, right? Like you wouldn't want to use that table; it'll fall apart. Yeah. 2 of them might be good, and 1 of them is really good.
Right.
Now, what I want to do then is take that to production. That's not building one table. That's building 800,000 copies of the same table every month. That's a factory. That's a warehouse worth of work, and that's much, much different. And that's what we lack, is that ability to take that one thing and then scale it dramatically. And it's not that there's no interest. It's right. That's a much different skill set, and we just don't have as much of that skill as what we need yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. At UNOS, one of the things that we have really started to invest in is data scientists and programmers that deeply understand large language models, because not only is there the current organ allocation stuff that we do, but we also do a lot of research, right? And we work with the overall research community to help in the future of drugs, or of new drugs that are going to come to market as it relates to organ transplants, either on the left or the right of an organ transplant happening. And I think being able to calculate those data points at scale, use it for research that will inform new policies that get put in. I think all of those are huge opportunities for us as an organization, as we position ourselves to be the future leader of organ allocation in the world. And I think that but I completely agree with you that you have to get it wrong many times before you get it right. And that's why those are protected in environments that are not in production, right? So we have our organ allocation system today, and then we have a bunch of sandbox environments, and that's how we do it at UNOS.
Yeah. And I want to make sure, I know we had to adjust things a little bit, but we're still doing good on time. My timekeepers were good, Kim? Okay. I know we had to adjust because we were trying to add a break before the next panel.
Absolutely.
So, one of the things that I want to sort of just ask is, what are your plans over the next few years for UNOS? Like, what are you seeing the strategy moving forward? Like, how are you aiming? What's your point on the horizon?
Yeah.
And do you feel like you have one, or maybe departmentally, organizationally, nationally?
Yeah, I think in healthcare, we have similar missions, right? It's to save lives. For the past 40 years, this organization has been at the center of saving over 1 million lives, right? And so the future for me is how many more we can save quicker and more efficiently. And I think the system now, I think, is proven to work in a way that is, I think demonstrable, but it's certainly not where we need to be. And I think for us, for me in particular, and as we drive this organization, it's not just saving lives. We know how to do that now. It's how do we do it more quicker? How do we do it more efficiently, more effectively? How do we capture data more efficiently about those patients to make better decisions, again, before they are on that list? And how do we get more people on that list? And how do we then go through that list much faster and use the organs that become available in the most effective and efficient way? I think now taking that and scaling that, I think, is exactly where I would like for us to go. And that's gonna mean that we get really, really good at the really hard stuff, at making sure that we're creating environments for failure and learning and growth. And we do so in very comfortable, safe settings, like you mentioned, before we take that and put that into a production and scale it. And I think that's where I believe the future should be going. I think there's so many other technologies that are ancillary to it that we should also be looking at and considering, right? There's, I won't even go into all of that, but I think there's just so many other.
You're good.
There's so many other, ancillary technologies that are starting to exist out there as technology continues to improve, that we're learning on, and I think we also need to be paying attention to that.
Yeah. I think the touch point that I mentioned yesterday, I got asked the question, like, what's my 3 to 5 year plan, or 3 to 5, 10? I don't, what am I doing tomorrow? And that sort of question. And I was thinking about it primarily as an organizational member, like, how do I build my team? How do I shape my own development? But I think what I also want to be thinking about is, what does healthcare want to do? And I think my main goal is to start educating or creating a desire for education in the leadership. And I don't know how yet to quite trick them into caring enough right? I really, and I'm all ears, right? If y'all have ideas, right? If I need to like surprise them at home, I don't know what the right solution is, but
it's gonna be scary.
at some level, I really want the different leaders in all of our organizations, and not just the healthcare organizations, but in the policymaking level, at federal and state levels, to have the same interest and be asking the same questions about healthcare AI and healthcare operations AI, which I need to start distinguishing between that clinical side and that non-clinical side.
Yep.
And I want them to care enough to say, hey, here's 12 points on the horizon. How can we get there? Yeah. And I would love, I mean, it's going to be awful to have to make these decisions, but at some point, I'd much rather have the decision, I'd prefer to have to make the decision of which points on the horizon to exclude from my focus, rather than trying to guess at which ones we should be aiming at. Yeah. And I think it's hard to synthesize vision in this arena because it's so wide open possibility-wise. You can do just about anything. Yeah. As my daughters have frequently sent me the most ridiculous and amusing memes using AI. It's quite capable of ludicrous things, and I don't think it's not gonna tell us where to use it. We tell it where we're gonna want to use it. Yeah. And I think that's one of the ways we do. Kind of steering back towards just one last question on human-centered design, something I had marked earlier, but I want to get just a quick plug for. Do you feel that you have a strategy sort of nailed down on how you plan to deploy these AI solutions to your consumers? Do you have a last mile vehicle of choice?
I mean, I think we sometimes complicate good software engineering and good product development, and think this human-centered design approach is this massive thing that we need to all like just start kind of getting on the process train on. And I think good human-centered design is building trust between the digital forms of the people that are interacting with your products and your services, and how you go about making sure that you're meeting the user's needs exactly when they need it the most, right? And so it was really interesting. I was speaking at a robotics conference like 2 years ago, and we were on a bus to an event, and I was sitting beside a transplant surgeon. No, sorry, not a transplant surgeon, a robotic surgeon, and he was telling me how many of his colleagues are actually leaving the field of medicine because they cannot work in their medical record system anymore. That is mind-blowing to me, that people are quitting their jobs, retiring early, because the thought of them sitting in front of a computer interacting with a system is so daunting for them now and so complicated and takes them hours to do one simple task that they would rather not do it. Yeah. That's insane. Right. That's like the antithesis of human-centered design. That's the antithesis of what we are trying to accomplish as a group of technologists that want to move us forward. And so I think about this vast gap that we have of where we want to go and the vision that we have and that we want to achieve and where we are today. Right. With these overburdened systems and our healthcare professionals that are trying to operate at the top of their license, but we keep dragging them down to the bottom. And good human-centered design, good software development is really bridging that gap fast.
Yeah. And I think between those components and some of the opportunities with ambient scribes and those sort of AI agents helping us in the transcript, we're really going to see a reemergence of what the sort of doc in the bag sort of view was, where there's actually this human interaction coming around again. I hate to wrap up any of these conversations because I feel like it's a lot of fun for me, but I want to give everybody here some opportunity to ask questions. Hopefully you'll have some. If not, we're just going to stare at you quietly for the duration of the remaining time. But no, if anybody has any questions, please raise your hands. I will try and get to whatever y'all are interested in talking about, except Kyle. No, what do you got, Kyle?
So you guys, you kind of hinted at there's operational use cases and clinical use cases. Can you talk about, it feels to me like AI
Yeah, I mean, part of it's the exact process I want to avoid doing, but yeah, we can talk of examples. So I don't know how many people in this room are involved. I was talking to someone from Coral recently. I'm not sure if they're still in the room. But Coral does a security assessment process. They review vendors. Prior to the vendor risk assessments, as an example, there's a multi-step process where generally users will go request things, right? That happens throughout the entire organization. As an example, purely hypothetical, please no one say that I'm building this, because then people will email me and ask for it, and I don't have the time right now to build this solution, unfortunately. But they would basically say, you could ask for a particular solution, and instead of spending days to weeks to in some cases months, depending on the complexity, to discuss a potential solution, you could have a real-time conversation with a web-enabled, document searching AI LLM, a large language model, that could basically say, oh, it sounds like you're asking for a new patient registration, kiosk system, right? To complement that interfaces with Epic or interfaces with Cerner. How many facilities are you planning to deploy this at? What's the timeline? It's asking you all these questions, and you're doing that whole process in a matter of minutes, and it's composing for you the draft that you will eventually send to the actual humans who help you get this process fulfilled. And it's doing as much of the vendor risk assessment that it can do on its own. It's doing as much of the security questionnaire. It's checking where the SOC 2 Type 2 is and doing all those things for you in minutes to seconds, if that's needed. But I'm not going to build it, because that's potentially a year's worth of incremental development integrating all those systems. It could open the ServiceNow request. It could contact Workday. It could query your existing list of systems and say, don't request this. We already have 2 platforms that do that, and it's in use at these 2 places. It can do all those things, but doing that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of development, which is deeply, deeply worthwhile if it's needed. If it's not needed, it's exactly what you said. It's a solution in search of a problem. And frankly, data scientists are too expensive to waste on things like that. The healthcare doesn't need to waste that sort of margin on that development. That's an example. There's, literally countless others. That's just the first one that comes to mind. I don't know if you all have a similar.
Well, I think I bucket them into maybe a couple. I take AI solutions in a couple of different buckets. I think there's artificial intelligence solutions that today make all of our lives easier. I'm sure that all of us have used ChatGPT, or we've used some other form of just general content generation in our everyday lives. I think that's going to continue to change and grow, and that's like the democratization of just the basics, right? There's going to be AI that comes out that's going to eliminate jobs. That will fundamentally happen. We're going to get more efficient. We're going to allow our machines to do things better. That's just a part of what the future, I believe, is going to hold. But then there's this other aspect of AI that is going to significantly change our lives. That, I think, is an area that we are still untapped on, right? How many drugs are going to be created using artificial intelligence? How many bombs for war are going to be generated and created for governments to use in the future, right? That will all happen, I believe, through artificial intelligence. It will not happen through just simply assembling of things anymore. And I think when you think about that at scale, while it can seem depressing, I think there's a lot of opportunities that can continue to exist. You talked about scribes, right? Scribing today is a really simple, easy use of AI. You can talk into your phone just like you would be talking to a patient, or maybe it's even listening in while you're talking to your patient. It will take out all of the uhs, the ums. It will understand what the words that you're saying and that's coming out of your mouth. It will understand context, and then it will put that into your medical record system. Simple. But that's the baseline, right? Now, imagine having access to every physician's interactions all in one large language model. and understanding how doctors make decisions for patients. AI is not about collecting a bunch of data and then trying to spit out an outcome. It's about predicting the next outcome.
Right.
And I think that the future, that final bucket is really understanding and trying to understand, like, how can we now take all of this data and anticipate the next move? And I think that's where we haven't really touched it yet. But I think that's where it's got to go.
And that might just be a matter of scale. Like, we don't
Yeah.
have enough observations yet. I mean, the scale of data you need to do something like that,
Yeah.
model training is significant, but it's inevitable. We will eventually have enough observations to do that exact model you're talking about.
Right.
I don't think a single healthcare system will do it. I think it'll be a conglomerate of healthcare systems that have purchased that data from partners. So, which is, if I was going to stress one other thing, just a tie-in, our legal teams have to be better at navigating AI and data.
Yeah.
I don't have any else to really say about that other than I think that's a really good tip that our teams need to get better at understanding the language around data and AI. Any other questions? Oh.
Yeah.
I have one. Do you all have a generative AI tool that, we'll call it, all associates can use? I mean, I know with my company, we have a tool, and it's called Spark.
Hmm?
And so Spark, what we call it Spark. But it's really allowed us to be more functional in doing, because we're not transcribing project management notes. We're not, literally, our teams meeting, if they can be recorded for regulatory reasons, we just throw that in there, and it creates that whole meeting, action items, kumbaya. We're not spending 1 minute transcribing teams' notes because of having this. It can create project, PowerPoint slides and all these things that they've created for us. Now, we have it internal because of business intelligence and stuff like that, but they've opened it up to every associate. Simple thing of transcribing an email. I don't credit anymore when I'm sending it up to my EVPs because it dots my I's and crosses my T's.
Yeah.
Makes me sound really intelligent.
That's awesome. I mean, those are some of the I call AI low-hanging fruit. I mean, I think that those are really valuable, and I'm remiss to say like easy deployments, because they're not easy. They still have a lot of risk, and in the healthcare environment, those are the tools you want to make super certain are not helping clinicians make clinical decision making, because they're not, and I'll repeat that, not trained for clinical decision making, right? Don't do that.
Oh, we have.
Yeah.
It's
I didn't think you were.
using
Yeah.
it in the wrong way. It has been trained to report it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from even using it for, we'll call it personal use.
Mm-hmm.
It's a business tool to be used in the business area.
Yeah.
which-
I think there's a lot of solutions.
Sparky's a snitch.
So there are solutions like obviously Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT Enterprise, Anthropic Claude Enterprise. There's a lot of the premier GPT-driven large language model tools that have a sort of a chat GUI have launched fairly Google Vertex, Gemini. There's their environment. They have pretty robust security controls, and that's really what you're looking for in a tool like this, is that on the back end, you want a functional GPT model. Right now is sort of the Cadillac of these models. What you really care about when you're investing in a platform like this is that, does it integrate well with your InfoSec team processes, right? Do they like it? Are they going to be able to audit it to the satisfaction that they're going to need when they need to do whatever their required protocols are? And because they're the back-end users. Because most of them are going to have that functionality. And to be candid, most of them all use OpenAI's GPT-4 algorithm, right? They're all driven. Copilot and OpenAI, ChatGPT Enterprise, they both use that. Google has its own, but I think Tableau's AI, they use the same back end as OpenAI. It's the software they build around the front end. And a lot of them are integrating into Teams. That's a solid platform because it's well deployed. But I think those are the first steps, right? Getting comfortable with that, and it's a good exposure to see the art of the possible. You mentioned that phrase,
Yeah.
right?
It's driven innovation because they've seen what it can do, oh, writing notes, oh, but can it do this? And then you have those people asking those questions and giving those innovative ideas of, wouldn't it be cool if it could do something like this? And why they would use that tool to do that creation, our digital team will go out there.
Right.
And never thought of it. I've seen the value at first. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not a chat GPT, I'm not putting my.
Oh, it'll make converts of most of anybody eventually.
Yeah.
I saw another question. Was it? Yeah, one over here.
One thing, I think you described classes' next phase of how they're gonna run their business.
I demand royalties.
As far as defining this, the desired outcome and what are the
Oh, yeah.
what are the commercial solutions.
Mhm.
pros and cons. I think you just described their next business.
Yeah.
Maybe.
My other question for both of you is whether we're shopping or whether we're building, what is the rubric by which we should measure the quality of our large language model?
Yeah.
Do you want to? You go first.
Let me just,
In other words, how
Yeah.
do you, when you build something internally, how do you convince your customers
yeah.
that it's good?
Right. First of all, you got to convince your own organization, right, that this is something worth tackling. I mean, you mentioned, like, how do you even get started in adopting artificial intelligence, some of the tools that exist today? And I think in a world where our legal teams are always going to be very risk-based in their approach to adopting any new tool or anything around their data, and then, those of us who are responsible for protecting our organization's data also have to deeply understand what that is. One thing that I did when I first started at UNOS is I realized and recognized that we need more of these AI tools, but how I bring that organization along, and it's a fairly large organization, is going to take so much time. So instead what I did was I established what's called a Center of Excellence model. I basically took groups from all different areas of the organization, and I said, why don't we meet at a particular cadence, whether it's every other week or every month, and all of us together will learn the future of artificial intelligence, the needs that we have across the organization, and now we're all fully bought in. And that includes our chief legal officer, who's now a part of the Center of Excellence, right? So she's learning right along with all of us. We are all evaluating different tools all at the same time. We're talking to Microsoft to better understand where our data is going from Copilot. We're understanding other systems that we may want to procure or bring into the organization. So I think all of those things kind of at least get the conversation started. I think the next step, though, to answer your question, for us, particularly at UNOS, is showing our work, right? So it's bringing people along for that journey of not just introducing an idea, but then following it up with, and here's what we did, and having those frequent touch points. And that's just part of, some of that's good account management, but I think a lot of it is making sure that they are bought into the same vision that we are setting out to achieve as well. And I think that's going to be the future success of UNOS and, frankly, any other organization that's trying to deliver large language models at scale.
Yeah, I think he answered that aspect of evaluation perfectly, so I'll just say ditto, and then I want to add this component, which is that I think individual large language models, individual AI components need to be evaluated as severely as we would traditional inferential statistics or modern day machine learning that isn't quote unquote AI. And one of the things that's different about this generation of models that we haven't faced before is that if you came to me 3 or 4 years ago and said, I want you to evaluate this Bayesian classifier, I want you to evaluate this new tool that uses XGBoost, it's an XGBoosted model and they're predicting blah, 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 whatever. I would possess the technology on my servers or my workstation even, and I could independently look at our data and validate that model and recreate that functionality. I can't do that because I don't have $8 million worth of GPUs. And if they do it Carillion, they've hidden them exceptionally well for me. But like I don't possess that horsepower. And so I have to leverage the models that they have. And so one of the best ways to evaluate a GPT-4 model is to use a GPT-4 model. And you can adversarially evaluate these models on aspects like sycophancy or hallucination and just misrepresentation, whether or not it generates hate speech. You know, these are important components as you're generating notes or messages. And you have to score them and make that evaluation component as vital to your change management protocol as you would any other component. You know, when you go through a change advisory board and you're saying, I'm going to change this prompt in Epic, that prompt drives the messages that go out to your patients, I think that needs to be evaluated almost more severely than an order set, because you're about to send heaven knows what to these patients. Now, there's a step that it's getting validated by a physician who, as we know, have oodles of free time and will read every line of that message. And so it's unfair to them to burden them with being the ones who check it, and we have the technology to check it. And so I think that's a component of evaluation that we should take on too. And unfortunately, my watch is telling me that we're out of time because our timekeeper had to go to another meeting. So let me, I think we're doing an impromptu break before the CIO panel. So I really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you for paying attention.